On the far side of the galaxy, where the spiral arms of stars spread out like glowing rivers, lay a planet called Ophis 9. It was an untamed world, brimming with life forms that had never been seen or catalogued by any human. The air here was thick with moisture, and the jungles seemed to go on forever, a labyrinth of giant trees, enormous ferns, and sprawling vines that glowed faintly under the planet's twin moons. Deep in the heart of this jungle, hidden from the prying eyes of any sentient species, a colossal creature roamed. The Thranak, a beast whose legend struck fear across dozens of planets, prowled in solitude. Its enormous, muscular form moved like a living mountain, covered in glistening scales that shimmered with a greenish hue, blending it into the thick foliage. Standing at 20 feet tall, with razor-sharp claws and rows of serrated teeth, the Thranak was the apex predator of Ophis 9. But tonight, the beast was not hunting. It was in pain. For days, the Thranak had been limping through its jungle home, each step sending sharp waves of agony through its immense body. The reason? A thorn, nearly 2 feet long, had embedded itself deep in its left paw. The vine it had accidentally stepped on was unlike anything from Earth, a thick, sinewy growth laced with tiny barbs, and a venom that numbed the area but caused a terrible infection. Even for a creature as massive and resilient as the Thranak, the wound was unbearable. With each passing hour, the infection spread, leaving the creature's powerful limbs swollen and tender. The mighty Thranak, which could tear through the hardest of metals with ease, was powerless against this simple thorn. Every time it tried to move, it would roar in frustration, the sound echoing through the jungle like thunder. Other creatures, sensing the predator's distress, had learned to stay far away, but none dared approach, not even to scavenge. The Thranak's size and reputation still held them at bay. The beast stopped near a dense thicket, its massive body casting a shadow over the land. It lowered itself onto the ground, growling softly, licking its paw in a vain attempt to ease the pain. But it was no use. The thorn was too deep, and the creature was too large to properly reach it. For the first time in its life, the Thranak was vulnerable. Fearless hunters like this beast weren't supposed to suffer. It was the jungle's king, untouchable and invincible. Yet now, it lay curled in on itself, helpless against the torment radiating from its wounded paw. Hours passed, and the jungle night came alive with the sounds of unseen creatures. The Thranak lifted its head occasionally, eyes glowing in the darkness, scanning for threats. But no predator would come near, for none dared challenge the wounded beast, even in its weakened state. Still, the Thranak knew that without help, it wouldn't last much longer. The infection was spreading faster now, creeping through its veins. It was only a matter of time before it became too weak to defend itself, and then the jungle would reclaim it piece by piece. Far across the stars, in a place unimaginably different from Ophis 9, Timothy Dawes sat at his cluttered desk in his small suburban room on Earth. The faint glow of his computer screen was the only source of light, as he furiously typed away on an online forum, one that no one else in his small circle of friends even knew existed. Timothy was 14, and for as long as he could remember, he had been obsessed with space, not just the usual stuff, like pictures of the Milky Way or the names of planets in the solar system. No, Timothy's fascination went deeper. He believed in aliens. Not in the way most people did, fearful of abductions or government conspiracies, but in the way that made him excited to think about the unknown possibilities beyond Earth. He had been studying theoretical physics and alien biology since he was 10, staying up late to read scientific papers that most adults found incomprehensible. His room was a shrine to everything he loved. Posters of galaxies and starships plastered the walls, and models of alien creatures from his favorite movies lined the shelves. On his desk, various gadgets and half-completed inventions cluttered the surface. Timothy liked to tinker. His latest project involved an interstellar communication device he had been building for months. Though it was far from functional, Timothy dreamed of the day he could use it to reach out to the cosmos and hear back. His online community, the Intergalactic Explorers Forum, was where he felt most at home. On the surface, it looked like a place where space enthusiasts shared their latest findings, theories, and creative works. But Timothy had discovered something strange about the site not too long ago. There were users who claimed to be from other planets. At first, he thought it was just a role-playing game, but the deeper he delved into their conversations, the more convinced he became that they were serious. That night, as he scrolled through the latest posts, something unusual caught his eye. A new thread had appeared, one written in an alien language Timothy had never seen before. But as he stared at the strange symbols on the screen, something odd happened. They began to make sense. Somehow he could read them, as though the meaning had been implanted directly into his brain. The message was brief but urgent. Thorn in pain, need help, life form injured, cannot move without causing further harm. Please assist. Timothy's heart skipped a beat. A Thorn? He had never heard of such a creature. Quickly, he pulled up the galactic star maps he had saved on his computer, tracing the coordinates provided in the message to a small, remote planet labeled Ophis 9. The planet wasn't listed on any human exploration charts. Could this be real? His mind raced. A powerful alien predator, stranded and in need of help? It sounded like something out of the comic books stacked beside his bed, but something about the message, the urgency in its simplicity, the way the alien language had just clicked in his head, made him think this wasn't a prank. Timothy's eyes drifted to the corner of his desk, where his incomplete warp gate prototype sat. It wasn't finished, and he wasn't even sure it would work. But if he could just make a few adjustments, he felt his pulse quicken. This was it. His chance to do something that no one on Earth would ever believe, to help a creature from another world. Without thinking twice, Timothy grabbed his tools and set to work. The dim light of his desk lamp flickered, casting long shadows over Timothy's cluttered workspace. His heart was racing as he read and reread the strange message on his screen. Thorn in pain, need help, life form injured, cannot move without causing further harm. Please assist. Timothy's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He didn't know how to respond. Was this real? Was there actually an injured alien creature on some distant planet, calling out for help through a mysterious intergalactic network? Or was it all just a prank, some elaborate role-playing game created by one of the forum's users? But something deep inside Timothy whispered that this was different. It felt real. He had been on the Intergalactic Explorers Forum long enough to recognize the usual chatter, the fan theories, and the harmless creative writing stories shared by fellow space enthusiasts. But this message, this was unlike anything he had ever seen. The urgency in the words, the strange language he had somehow understood, it all pointed to one undeniable fact. This wasn't just a game. With a deep breath, Timothy decided to respond. "What's a Thorn? Where are you?" he typed, his hands trembling slightly. He hit send and waited, staring at the screen as if willing a reply to appear. Seconds passed, then minutes. His eyes darted nervously around his room, as if half expecting the creature to burst through his window and demand help. He glanced at the corner of his desk, where his unfinished warp gate prototype sat, a silent reminder of the line he was about to cross. The device was nowhere near complete. It was a haphazard collection of circuit boards, alien-like runes, and glowing crystals that he had painstakingly gathered from online vendors and salvage yards. He had spent months building it, but it still lacked the final component, a stable energy source. Just as Timothy was about to give up and chalk the whole thing up to a bizarre hoax, a new message appeared on the screen. Ophis 9, Jungle Sector, coordinates attached. Thorn, local apex predator, large, dangerous, but this one is hurt, needs assistance. Timothy swallowed hard. Ophis 9? He had never heard of it. Opening a separate tab, he quickly pulled up one of his favorite star mapping programs. Typing in the coordinates, he zoomed out, scanning the region of space indicated by the message. There it was, a small, remote planet orbiting a distant star in the outskirts of a galaxy far from Earth's reach. It wasn't listed on any human exploration records, and there were no notes from any known probes or missions. It was like a ghost in the universe, completely uncharted. His mind whirled with excitement. This was real. This wasn't some distant colony or research station. This was an alien planet, one that no human had ever set foot on. And there, somewhere in the dense jungles of Ophis 9, a creature named Thorn lay injured and in need of help. But Timothy was just a kid. He wasn't an astronaut or a scientist with interstellar travel capabilities. He was a 14-year-old space nerd, sitting in his bedroom surrounded by gadgets that barely worked. What could he possibly do to help? His eyes drifted once more to the warp gate prototype. The device hummed softly, almost as if it were calling to him, urging him to take the next step. It was crazy, insane even, but Timothy had spent countless nights dreaming of this exact moment. A moment when the stars would call out to him, offering him the chance to do something no one else could. It was more than a hobby. It was his purpose. Timothy's mind raced through all the possibilities. If he could finish the warp gate, even if just long enough for one trip, he could use it to transport himself to Ophis 9. Theoretically, the device could open a wormhole, linking 2 points in space-time for a brief period. He had designed it to be an instant travel system, a way to move between planets in seconds. But there were risks. He hadn't tested it yet. The energy source was unstable, and if something went wrong, there was a good chance he wouldn't survive the trip. Not to mention, even if he made it to Ophis 9, he had no idea what awaited him. A dangerous, injured alien predator was probably not the safest creature to approach, even if it was hurt. Still, the idea of turning away gnawed at him. What if this was real? What if there truly was a creature out there, suffering and helpless, waiting for someone to come to its aid? Timothy had always dreamed of meeting an alien, of proving to the world that there was life beyond Earth. And now that dream was knocking on his door. He couldn't ignore it. His hands trembled as he pushed away his doubts and got to work. The prototype was almost complete, but it needed a power source strong enough to open a stable wormhole. Timothy ransacked his closet, pulling out every piece of tech he had collected over the years, searching for something, anything, that could provide the energy he needed. At last he found it. An old power core he had salvaged from a broken-down alien drone he had stumbled across on a deep web forum years ago. The core had never worked before, but maybe, just maybe, it would provide the final jolt of energy the warp gate needed. For hours, Timothy worked in silence, his room lit only by the soft glow of his lamp and the faint, eerie light of the warp gate prototype. He soldered wires, connected circuits, and rewired components with precision. The warp gate began to hum louder, its core glowing brighter as it neared completion. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but he ignored it, pushing forward with a determination he had never felt before. Finally, as the clock neared midnight, Timothy tightened the last screw and stood back. The warp gate was complete. He stared at it, his heart pounding in his chest. The device hummed with energy, the glowing crystals swirling with light as the circuits came to life. He had done it. He had built something that could theoretically tear through the fabric of space and time. But could it actually work? Taking a deep breath, Timothy grabbed his backpack and quickly filled it with the essentials. A flashlight, his toolkit, a portable med kit, and of course a few snacks. He had no idea how long he would be on Ophis 9, or what he would face there. But he knew one thing for sure: he had to go. Before he could lose his nerve, Timothy typed in the coordinates of Ophis 9 into the warp gate's control panel. The air around him crackled with energy as the device powered up, a shimmering vortex of light swirling in the center of the machine. For a moment, Timothy hesitated. Was he really about to do this? Was he actually going to step through a portal to another planet to help an injured alien creature? He glanced back at his computer screen, where the last message from the mysterious contact still flickered. Thorn in pain. Please assist. Taking one last deep breath, Timothy stepped forward and plunged into the light. The world around Timothy dissolved into a blur of colors and rushing wind as he stepped into the shimmering vortex. For a split second, he felt like he was being stretched and compressed at the same time, as though every atom in his body was being pulled apart and stitched back together. He could barely breathe, his vision darkening as the vortex's swirling lights pulsed faster and faster. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the sensation stopped. Timothy stumbled forward, his feet sinking into soft, damp earth. He gasped, taking in a lungful of warm, thick air. Slowly, his vision cleared, and as he looked around, he realized with a mixture of awe and disbelief that he had done it. He was no longer on Earth. The alien jungle of Ophis 9 stretched out before him like something straight out of a dream. Towering trees rose high above him, their branches twisting together to form a thick green canopy that barely allowed any light through. Strange plants, some glowing faintly with bioluminescent hues of purple and blue, covered the jungle floor. Oversized ferns and vines as thick as his arms coiled up the trunks of trees, their leaves swaying gently, even though there was no breeze. The air was heavy, rich with the smell of damp earth and strange alien flora. Distant sounds echoed through the trees, soft growls, chirps, and the occasional rustling of unseen creatures. Timothy blinked in astonishment. He had seen countless alien landscapes in movies, comics, and books, but nothing compared to this. This was real. He was here, on an alien planet, breathing alien air. A grin spread across his face despite the nerves coiling in his stomach. He had really done it. The warp gate had worked. His wild dream of stepping foot on an alien world had come true. But reality quickly set in. He wasn't here to sightsee. The message from the mysterious stranger had said the Thronak was nearby, and it was in pain. Timothy wasn't sure how close the creature was, but he knew he didn't have much time to stand around gawking. He pulled out his handheld scanner from his backpack, a device he had cobbled together over the years from various pieces of tech. The scanner blinked to life, its screen showing a map of the immediate area. The coordinates he had been given were only a short distance away. Timothy swallowed nervously and started walking, his shoes squelching in the thick mud beneath him. He moved carefully, avoiding the glowing vines and strange plants that twisted out of the earth. Some of them looked harmless, but others seemed to pulse with a faint, almost menacing energy. He wasn't sure what was safe and what wasn't, so he kept his distance from anything that looked remotely dangerous. As he made his way deeper into the jungle, the ambient sounds of the alien wildlife grew louder. Occasionally he caught glimpses of small creatures darting between the trees, beings with too many eyes or limbs to count, scurrying away as soon as they sensed him. The air grew thicker, the trees denser, and Timothy had to push his way through large, fern-like leaves and overgrown roots to continue. The entire environment felt alive, humming with energy, as if the jungle itself was watching him. And then he heard it, a low, guttural growl, so deep it seemed to reverberate through the ground itself. Timothy froze, his heart racing. The sound was like thunder, rolling through the trees, sending shivers down his spine. It wasn't far, in fact, it was very close. He took a few cautious steps forward, pushing aside a large vine that blocked his path. Beyond it, in a clearing surrounded by towering trees, he saw it, the Thronak. Timothy's breath caught in his throat. He had read the description, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight of the creature in person. The Thronak was enormous, easily over 20 feet tall, its body massive and muscular, covered in thick, iridescent scales that shimmered in shades of deep green and blue. Its 4 powerful legs were splayed out beneath it, each one ending in sharp, clawed feet. Its head was massive, with a long, wide snout and rows of jagged teeth that gleamed in the faint light. 2 glowing yellow eyes glared out from its head, intelligent but clouded with pain. But what struck Timothy the most was not the creature's size or its terrifying appearance. It was the sight of the beast's left paw, where the thorn had embedded itself deep in its flesh. The paw was swollen, dark veins spreading out from the wound where the alien thorn had pierced its thick skin. Blood, dark and viscous, dripped from the wound, staining the ground beneath it. The thorn itself was massive, nearly as long as Timothy's arm, with barbs that twisted cruelly into the beast's flesh. The Thronak let out another low growl, its head drooping in pain. It was trying to move, but every time it shifted, the thorn dug deeper, causing the creature to let out a pained snarl. Its massive body trembled with each breath, and Timothy could tell that the infection was spreading fast. For a moment, Timothy stood frozen in place. The creature before him was the stuff of nightmares, An apex predator from a world far beyond Earth's imagination. It could tear him apart in seconds, even in its weakened state. But as Timothy watched it struggle, he realized something else. The Thronak wasn't just a dangerous alien predator. It was suffering, and it needed help. Timothy took a deep breath, willing his legs to move. Slowly, he stepped forward, his hands shaking as he reached for the small medkit in his backpack. He wasn't sure how he was going to pull the Thorn out. He hadn't planned that far ahead, but he knew he had to try. He couldn't just leave the creature here to suffer. As he approached, the Thronak's head snapped up, its glowing eyes locking onto Timothy. For a moment, the two stared at each other. Timothy could feel the raw power radiating from the beast, the heat of its massive body as it growled low in its throat. He raised his hand slowly, trying to show that he wasn't a threat. "Easy," he whispered, though his voice shook. "I'm not here to hurt you. I want to help." The Thronak's eyes narrowed, its massive body tensing. It let out another warning growl, but it didn't move. Timothy took that as a good sign. Maybe the creature was smart enough to understand that he wasn't a threat, or maybe it was just too tired and in too much pain to care. Timothy knelt down by the creature's paw, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. The Thorn was even more grotesque up close, its barbs twisted into the Thronak's flesh, and dark, thick blood oozed from the wound. He could see the infection spreading, the veins around the Thorn pulsing with an alien toxin. His hands trembled as he pulled a pair of pliers from his toolkit. "Okay, big guy," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is going to hurt, but I promise it'll feel better once it's out." The Thronak let out a low rumble, its head lowering slightly as if bracing itself. Timothy swallowed hard and, with a deep breath, clamped the pliers around the Thorn. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, with a sharp tug, Timothy yanked the Thorn free. The Thronak roared in pain, its massive head snapping back as its body convulsed. Timothy scrambled backward, heart hammering in his chest, half expecting the creature to lash out at him in anger. The roar echoed through the jungle, shaking the leaves and sending smaller creatures scurrying into the shadows. But the Thronak didn't attack. Instead, it lay there, panting heavily, its massive chest rising and falling. Timothy stared at the bloodied Thorn in his hand, his legs trembling. He had done it. He had actually done it. Quickly, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a small vial of alien herb extract, a healing salve he had made from studying various alien species online. He wasn't sure if it would work, but it was the best he had. Carefully, he applied the salve to the Thronak's wound, watching as the dark veins slowly began to fade. For a long moment, the jungle was silent, save for the heavy breathing of the creature before him. Then the Thronak slowly lifted its massive head, its glowing yellow eyes meeting Timothy's once again. There was no anger in its gaze, no rage, just a deep, almost grateful rumble. Timothy exhaled, his entire body shaking with relief. He had done it. He had helped the beast. The Thronak let out one last, low growl, softer this time, almost as if it were saying thank you. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it rose to its feet. The ground trembled as the massive creature stood tall, towering over Timothy once more. But there was no malice in its posture, only the regal strength of a creature that had survived countless battles. The beast gave Timothy one last, lingering look, then turned and lumbered off into the jungle, disappearing into. Timothy stood frozen, watching as the massive form of the Thronak disappeared into the thick jungle undergrowth. The ground still vibrated beneath his feet from the weight of its steps, but as the creature vanished, the jungle around him slowly returned to its natural state. The alien foliage rustled softly, and the distant chirping of unseen creatures resumed, as if the planet itself was exhaling a long-held breath. He let out a shaky sigh, his heart finally beginning to slow. The weight of what had just happened hit him all at once. He had come to a distant alien world, met a creature so terrifying and massive that most people would never believe it existed, and somehow he had helped it. It didn't seem possible. None of this seemed possible. But the bloody Thorn still clutched in his hand was proof. It was real. He had pulled this alien barb from the paw of a beast that most of humanity couldn't even imagine, let alone encounter. Timothy had done the impossible, and now he stood on an alien planet, utterly alone, with the jungle silent around him. A sudden wave of exhaustion washed over him. His hands were trembling, and his legs felt weak. The adrenaline that had been keeping him going drained from his body, leaving him shaky and exhausted. He stumbled backward, collapsing onto the soft jungle floor. The moist ground was surprisingly warm against his skin, and for a moment he just lay there, staring up at the dense canopy of alien trees above him. He wasn't sure how long he lay there, lost in thought, but eventually the hum of his scanner brought him back to reality. He sat up quickly, his pulse spiking with sudden concern. The warp gate. He had nearly forgotten about it. Timothy scrambled to his feet, ignoring the aches and soreness in his body, and pulled the handheld scanner from his backpack. The screen blinked with faint energy readings, but they weren't stable. The portal he had used to travel to Ophis 9 was still active, but just barely. The power core he had salvaged was losing energy faster than he had anticipated, and if it went offline before he made it back, he would be trapped here, alone on an alien world with no way home. His mind raced. He couldn't afford to waste time, but something inside him urged him to stay, just for a moment longer. His eyes drifted back toward the place where the Thranok had disappeared into the jungle. He had felt something strange back there, something more than just the connection between a human and an injured creature. It was as if the Thranok had truly understood what he had done for it. Timothy shook his head, banishing the thought. It was impossible, right? It had to be just a wild animal, reacting to pain and relief like any Earth creature would. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that there had been more to the encounter. A soft, distant rumble reached his ears, a reminder of the beast's presence somewhere out in the jungle. He wasn't entirely sure what it meant, but the sound didn't carry any aggression or warning, just the same deep, resonant tone that had echoed through the jungle when the Thranok had acknowledged him earlier. He glanced back down at the scanner. The energy readings were growing fainter by the second. His window to return home was closing fast. With one last look toward the jungle, Timothy turned and sprinted back toward the coordinates where the warp gate was located. His footsteps were quick, his heart pounding with the urgency of the situation. The jungle seemed to shift around him as he ran, the glowing vines and towering trees blurring in his peripheral vision. But despite the alien terrain, Timothy's path was clear in his mind, and he moved with surprising speed through the dense vegetation. After what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes, Timothy finally reached the small clearing where the warp gate still hummed softly. The swirling vortex of energy was dimmer now, the light flickering as the power core struggled to maintain the portal. He could feel the heat radiating off the device, the machinery straining to hold the connection between Earth and Ophis 9. He didn't have much time. Timothy hesitated for a split second, taking one last look around at the alien jungle. It was breathtaking, unlike anything he had ever seen or imagined. For all its dangers and unknowns, this planet had been a place of discovery and, strangely, connection. He wasn't sure if he would ever get a chance like this again. But for now, his mission was complete. The Thranok was safe, and he needed to get home before the warp gate collapsed. He took a deep breath and stepped toward the flickering portal. Just as his hand reached out to touch the edge of the swirling light, a deep, familiar rumble echoed behind him. Timothy spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. Emerging from the trees, the Thranok appeared once more. Its massive form seemed to glide between the thick trunks, its glowing yellow eyes locking onto Timothy with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. But this time there was no pain in the creature's gaze. It moved with a new strength, its injured paw no longer dragging. The wound had already started to heal, thanks to the salve Timothy had applied. The beast stood at the edge of the clearing, towering over the trees, and casting a long shadow. For a moment it was completely still, simply watching Timothy. Timothy's breath caught in his throat. Was the Thranok following him? No, that couldn't be. But the creature's eyes seemed to convey something deeper than simple curiosity. It tilted its massive head, letting out a low, resonant growl that sent vibrations through the air. And then, to Timothy's utter shock, the Thronak lowered itself onto its front legs, bowing its enormous head toward him. It wasn't a gesture of submission or fear. This was something else. It was as if the beast was acknowledging him, thanking him in a way that transcended words. Timothy felt a lump form in his throat. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. This colossal, terrifying alien creature, feared throughout the galaxy, was showing him gratitude. You're welcome, Timothy whispered, his voice barely audible. He wasn't sure if the Thronak could understand him, but it didn't matter. Somehow he knew that the connection between them had gone beyond language. The beast gave one last slow rumble, then turned and disappeared into the jungle, its massive form melting into the shadows once more. Timothy stood there for a moment longer, his mind reeling. He had just made contact with an alien creature in a way that no human ever had. The Thronak had trusted him, and in return, it had shown him something he couldn't quite put into words. Finally, the flickering of the portal snapped him out of his thoughts. The warp gate was about to fail. With a final glance toward the jungle, Timothy stepped into the portal. The familiar sensation of being stretched and compressed washed over him as the vortex enveloped his body. The world around him blurred once more, and then with a jolt, Timothy was back in his room on Earth. He stumbled forward, landing in a heap on his bedroom floor, the soft hum of the warp gate fading into silence behind him. For a few moments, Timothy just lay there, staring up at the ceiling of his room. It felt surreal to be back in such a normal, familiar place after everything he had just experienced. The alien jungle, the massive Thronak, the Thorn, it all felt like a dream. But the dirt on his clothes and the faint scent of the alien planet still clinging to him told him otherwise. Slowly, Timothy sat up, glancing around at his cluttered room. The portal had powered down completely, the energy core spent. His body ached, his mind was exhausted, but he couldn't stop the smile from creeping onto his face. He had done it. He had traveled to another planet, met an alien creature, and helped it. No one on Earth would ever believe him, but that didn't matter. He knew what he had done. He knew the connection he had made. And somehow he had a feeling that the Thronak wouldn't forget him either. As Timothy stood and dusted himself off, he realized something. This wasn't the end of his adventure. It was only the beginning. The universe was vast, filled with countless worlds, creatures, and mysteries waiting to be discovered. And somewhere, out there in the depths of space, his new friend, the Thronak, was roaming free. Timothy smiled to himself as he sat back down at his desk, already thinking about what he would build next. The stars were calling again.